Hello everyone, I was sent this map by somebody who had been inspired to make the first beat map by my videos. So I'm gonna quickly look at the map and give him some feedback. First thing I noticed was obviously the song. It was Lapis Lazuli by Mimi. That's something that I actually mapped when I was a newer mapper. The other thing I noticed immediately is that my background is a much higher quality. So just go take my background if you'd like. I have a higher quality source of it, I guess. Okay, so then moving on to the actual map, something I noticed immediately was that your offset is incorrect. You should be moving your red line to this sound, which is where the drop actually happens. So this is where your red line would be starting. It's not here. So everything is like half a beat too early, like 1 beat too early, basically, in your map, timing-wise. But that's fine. Now, this is your first map, right? And so ultimately, the issues are going to be very prevalent throughout the entire map. So I'm not really going to spend a whole lot of time drilling down into the nitpicky details on across the entire map, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about the first section or two and explain sort of some of the more major issues, not all of them, but just going to tackle a couple. And then your job is then could be move on to a new map and make an entirely new map with sort of these ideas in mind, so that we can then give you additional feedback. So starting off, the rhythms here are pretty okay, but then we end up in a situation where we're not really representing some of the changes, right? So like here, for example, there's this very interesting piano rhythm that happens that wasn't there before, but we didn't really represent that. I would have liked to see something more like this, where we have some kind of low spacing thing for perhaps the piano melody, and then we do something else for this entirely, or we do something else for this, right? But just mapping over those with these held sliders is not. It's mapping the vocal, sure, but it's not really representing the piano melody. And hey, we're talking about Mimi here, of all people. This producer is known for their piano melodies. Like, you have to map the piano on Mimi songs. Okay. And then, like, from this point on, the rhythms kind of get a little bit weird because they happen too early. And in some cases, they're too late. Like, in this case, we really want this slider to be here. When we talk about rhythms, generally it's viewed that the active part of an object, right? So that's either an active object is what you click on, the active. So there's an active component. So that's the circles and the slider heads. Spinners are all passive emphasis, and so on and so forth. We generally want that active, that click, to be on the point of emphasis in the song. So in this case, there's that big cymbal crash. We would want the head of this slider to be there. And then we look here. This one's not really that important, right? So we have the active here. We have an active here, but this one's really not that important. And then we have the tail here where there's another vocal, which is more important than the head here. And we generally want to avoid the tails having more significance than the head. The other factor here is that we start the clicking here. So these are both circles at the same rhythm, but this one's the much more prominent one. But this is where, but really, because you go from a slider to the circle here, you're actually putting a ton of emphasis on this circle, which is then overshadowed by this, right? So probably this would be a much better rhythm to use. And then doing this. And then you get some sort of symmetry here with these vocals. I didn't see it like this. This part here does get really confusing rhythm-wise because it's not really doing what the song is doing. Like, for example, there's a sound here. There's no sound here, but you have the tail here. So that would need to get shortened. This is not on the right spot. You'd want it here. This is supposed to be there. You want that there. And then you want something here. And there's a triple here that's not being mapped. So really your rhythm would probably look something more like this. Actually, I think that there's a triple here too. And, we have this circle here. And then there's this, like, slider on this kind of irrelevant sound. So I would move the slider here, and that's going to give it a lot more emphasis. You can kind of see how that works. Okay, so we've talked about the rhythm. Let's also talk about playfield, right? So looking at these sections, we end up with patterns that really just stay in the same spot on the playfield. And it wasn't so bad here, but it's kind of getting rough as this progresses. We look at this, for example. And all of this is just staying in the same part of the playfield, the center, and just circling around the center. And we're not really using the edges of the playfield or anything like that. And it's becoming very cluttered. Hopefully this really does demonstrate that very clearly for you. Now, this isn't necessarily, like, there are some situations where cluttering the playfield can be done effectively, but not for the entire map. And they have to be done very intentionally. These relationships are very haphazard. They're not intentional. So that's something to look into. Now, there are some easy fixes to this. One of the fixes is really just to look at what you were doing before. I really strongly recommend to turn off hit animations. So if you have hit animations on, it removes some of the fades. And this is a little bit more realistic to what you'd see in the actual game. But having it off helps to preserve the sense of object permanence that you really need to be a good mapper. So pay attention to where you previously were, and always try to move to a place that you were not just at. So for example, if I'm here, well, my next object doesn't want to be here. It wants to be maybe over here somewhere. Or over here, which I wasn't down here before. Or maybe up here, or over here, right? So try to go somewhere that you weren't before, especially on those points of emphasis where it justifies a bigger spacing, right? If you have a big cymbal crash, okay, we want to emphasize that. Oh, let's emphasize that with bigger spacing and breaking off from our previous existing patterns and going to a new part of the playfield. And so then you get some playfield emphasis in there too, right? So this can be down here, for example. And maybe we just kind of hang out over here in the bottom, and we move up, and then there's a point of emphasis, so maybe we go over here, and we change our rotation around the playfield. And, so on and so forth. So there's that. So we talked about the playfield usage. We really want to unclutter the playfield. We talked about rhythm. We want the active impact hit to be on the actual point of emphasis. And let's see, what else major points can we talk about? Ultimately, the goal is that for the song to be represented, and in my opinion, this is a hot take, but in my opinion, songs or maps should represent the song that they're paired with. Because if they aren't, then why are you mapping that song? Right? And it's kind of a shocker that I think that, right? But if you're playing a rhythm game and you're choosing a song to map, you should be mapping that song. And the only way to map that song is to emphasize the same things that the song emphasizes. So if the song has something that's of importance, your map should make that of relatively equal significance. And so some of the ways that we can do that is by avoiding making everything kind of feeling the same. Because if there's points that are in the song that are really stand out to you, you want points in the map that are stand out. And if everything is stand out, because everything's really intense, then nothing really stands out. And so you're going to run into this issue where if you make the calm sections, this is a relatively calm section in the context of the map. If you make these relatively calm sections really intense, high spacing, high object density, that kind of thing, then you're going to have a difficult time creating that contrast later on when there's more intense parts of the song. So, for example, here, this is a very fast-paced sort of patterning. Or you have this, right? This is going to feel very similar to this in terms of its intensity, its pacing. But when you look at that, doesn't this have like sort of a rise in that pitch? Or you look at this, right? This is a much more intense part in the song with this really, really fast drum, but it's mapped in actually an easier way because there's less density. There's a longer held slider, which is generally perceived to be less intense. Or then you go into this section here where the spacing here is very similar to the spacing here, right? Used in this section. And there's not really that significant contrast that the song is really warranting here. You did a couple instances where it was really well done. Like, for example, this is more spaced relative to what's going on in the rest of the map or the rest of the section for that more intense standout vocal for it or melody here. That being said, this object, just delete it because you want the emphasis to be here and here where there's the melody. This is a big hit. You have the melody here picking up. There's not really any sound here, so just don't map it, right? And then you get that nice break in the rhythm, which is going to emphasize the break in the song. So there's that. There was one instance where you did a nice thing like that. Here's an example as well where the song is kind of winding down in intensity, but the actual jumps and the spacing did not. It didn't do that. It's very intense. Which is done contradictorily. That's not a word. It contradicts what the song is doing, what you did in the map, which isn't doing justice to what the song is. Okay, here's what I want to look for. So, for example, you did a really nice job here of slowing down the SV using a much longer slider than is normal to really emphasize the slowing of the song here. That was really nice here. But the song increases in intensity here with this really impactful vocal, really impactful piano hit, and the slow slider here, which you had previously used here, doesn't really create that contrast because you're already moving slowly. So in this case, because you did a slow slider here, which contrasts really nicely from the faster movement here, you would want to increase the slider velocity here so that you get that change. So that's an example. And that's how you emphasize the song, is emphasizing sort of the same things that the song is emphasizing. All right, so we talked about sort of general emphasis. We talked about rhythm choice and sort of making sure that you're placing your active objects, your circles and your slider heads on the points of emphasis and putting the tails on less significant parts of the song. And we talked about playfield usage, really giving things their space to breathe, moving around the playfield, and so on and so forth. Hopefully that helps. There's definitely a lot more I could say on this, but that should give you plenty to work with and plenty to emphasize on your future maps. And so, like I said, feel free to send me your future maps. If anyone watching this has maps they want to send me for feedback or advice, please don't hesitate to do so. All right, have a good one.